Vivien Theodore Thomas, born August 29th, 1910. He was an American laboratory supervisor who developed a procedure to help treat blue babies. Millions of babies would have died in this country if not for this procedure. And that's a heart defect, a congenital heart defect that resulted in low levels of oxygen in the blood. He figured out a way to reverse that. And without any education past high school, Vivien Theodore Thomas rose above poverty and racism to become a cardiac surgeon, surgery pioneer. He wanted to be a surgeon. He wanted to be a doctor. But of course, racism and poverty prevented that, but it didn't stop him from reaching his goals. And he also taught many of the country's most prominent surgeons. I'm with Don Calloway. How did you find out? Most Def played him in Something the Lord Has Made. There was a film about Vivien Theodore Thomas. I remember watching it and going, wow, how come I didn't know about him? When did you find out about this man?
Through that movie, 2004. So that was before, we were in this Black media content now. So if something came out with Most Def in it, you was watching, right? So I watched it in 2004 and then took it upon myself to do a good amount of reading in the years that have since passed. And now I'm out here in DC. He was in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins. So we're just kind of aware of him in a very prescient way. Remarkable man, incredible man who was given an opportunity that came as a result of time and circumstance. Ecclesiastes 9:11, the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong, but what?
Don't quote me on what.
I ain't gonna do you like that. Okay.
Don't do it.
So the Bible says the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong, and most people say, but to he who endures to the end. That's not what it says. The book says, but time and chance happens to them all. So Vivien Thomas, man who was born into the most crushing of poverty circumstances, Jim Crow South, but also had this weird thing happen where he was actually going to medical school because, as we know, there were Black doctors. Lincoln University in Missouri producing doctors. Howard University producing Black doctors at that time.
Harry.
1920, Meharry, of course. 1929, the stock market crashes. So his savings are wiped out. So he has to just take a job as a custodian at this hospital under Dr. Alfred Blaylock. All this was kind of stuff we learned along the years. And had that stock market not crashed, he would have been a pioneering Black surgeon. Perhaps he would have come up with this, but we would not be we wouldn't remember him as much as we do now because he just would have been a genius Black surgeon as opposed to the guy who gave this to this white guy who had this incredible platform at one of the global hospitals of the world, Johns Hopkins. So weird confluence of circumstances. So we end up remembering him and revering him. But if you think about how many Dr. Vivien Thomas, he was not a doctor, and it's important.
Well, we should, Don, we are consumed. You just talked about the great lie, if not for racism, if not for, this institution of racism, how many more doctors, how many more lawyers, how many more engineers, or however, whatever success looks like in this country. And I'm really moving away from this whole title thing. Just because you have a title doesn't mean that you are necessarily well equipped. And just because you don't, doesn't mean, especially when we're talking about somebody whose grandparents were born in bondage, he was born in New Iberia, Louisiana. You're wearing a Grambling sweatshirt right now, a nod to that. And you talk about the Great Depression, when America has a cold, Black people have pneumonia. Imagine that during that time. And the New Deal, which brought a lot of people out of that depression, and of course the war, Black people didn't even have benefit of that New Deal that would drag people into a sense of middle class or a sense of having a footing in this country. And this man worked through that as a janitor. Yesterday I was talking about, the work, was it last week, of a doctor who, after he worked, he went and studied more. No, it was who was it this week? Tech Tuesday. Lewis Latimer was yesterday, and there's story after story of people who, after their day was done, went and continued to study to do the things that they wanted to do. And I wanted, every day that we do this, to drop some breadcrumbs. First of all, being a janitor is nothing to be, feeling disrespected.
It's not.
He did the job that he had to do, but he didn't allow that to define all of who he was. Still went into that lab, still did that. And the man that you mentioned, Dr. Alfred Blaylock, some would say because it's really depicted in this movie that he stole or that he, usurped all of the, genius of Vivien Theodore Thomas. But I will say he gave him an opportunity, because he could have been a racist that, you don't have the right to be here with me. You don't have the right to even touch these babies. You don't have the right to be in this lab because you're Black and you're inferior. No. He gave him full reign because he recognized the genius in him. And I think, that's to be, as we're going to talk about Mark Cuban today, to applaud somebody that could recognize and understand the time that we're living in, as well as being racist. But I'm going to still give this man an opportunity, even though, most folk wouldn't even let him step foot into that space to touch some babies.
Now, he gave him the opportunity, yes, and you can't take that from Blaylock, but he did it because he saw that Vivien Thomas was essential to the enterprise. And he saw that Vivien Thomas knew everything he did, knew everything he knew, and could do everything he did, such that he could not have come up with the procedure to defeat blue baby syndrome without Vivien Thomas in the room.
Correct.
So it's less a function of Blaylock's charity and more of a function of Vivien Thomas being a savant, a genius, an absolute value add, because you do not have this process without. He gave him a chance, frankly, because Blaylock did not like arriving to the laboratory at a certain time. He liked walking in right before the surgery. So he would tell Vivien Thomas, hey, cut the dog open and prepare the heart for surgery so I can just walk in and mess around with the valves and the blood flow. And he saw that Vivien Thomas would cut the dog open during these experimental phases. He would cut the pig open. He would prepare everything as impeccably and as skillfully as would a surgeon. So all he had to do was walk in, and then eventually he was like, man, what else do you know? What else can you do? So there was a very distinct value add, which Blaylock only had to come in and kind of do his cosmetic thing. But Vivien Thomas had very clearly figured out all of the procedures, and I think that Blaylock recognized that.
But we wouldn't know his name because Blaylock could have not said his name, could not have given him credit, could have kept him as an erased figure, as so many Black people were erased from history, and he chose not to. So I'm not, saying the man Alfred Blaylock was great. I'm saying he did something most white people wouldn't do. Most white people would just take the credit, as they did with the patents and all of the other amazing things Black people did that we will never know about. But we know about Vivien Thomas today because Blaylock gave him credit for the work that he did. And I think that is, when we talk about allyship, yes, he needed him. He could have just needed him taking what he brought, still paid him a janitor's salary, by the way.
Right.
Still was, because that was all he could get him on the faculty as a janitor. But he gave him credit for the work that he did produce.
He did. And ultimately, I know that this is an inspiring story. I know that it's a great story of allyship, but the thing that keeps ringing in the back of my head and running on the back more toward the front is like, gosh, how many more should there have been? How many more should have had the opportunity? How much wealth was stolen, not only from Black people and Black families, but frankly, how much talent was the world robbed of, right? Because of the racist practices of this day. And that's the true loss here,
Yeah. Well, you and I are here standing on the shoulders of all of that genius. So I'm 1976, John Hopkins awarded him an honorary doctorate and named him an instructor of surgery for John Hopkins School of Medicine. So again, Vivien Theodore Thomas, our change maker.